Hi, video to help remind everyone how to derive hybrids and then a quick way to memorize them so that you don't have to figure them out laboriously every time you need to use one. So this is page 103 from the supplement, which at the time you're watching this video, you probably will have already done this page in a previous week. But I'm showing it to just remind you of what the process is. So the very first thing you ever do when you want to consider using hybrids of polychords is to analyze the progression that you're going to reharmonize. So a progression like this, very straightforward, you can tell is 1 major 7, 4 major 7, 2, 5, and then related to of sub 5 of 1. Hybrids don't have thirds. So let's go through the process again. So what you do is you write the chord scale for each chord, which is why you have to analyze it first so you know what chord scales go with it. And then you put an X through the root and third of each scale because hybrid voicings do not contain thirds and their roots should not be repeated in the upper structures. So right now we're going to be applying this to this sequence, which I've given you. These are the chords that we are going to reharmonize with hybrids. And so I've written the chord scale for the first chord, which is 1 major 7. And so I've written the C scale, a C Ionian scale. And it said to cross out the root and cross out the third note. We don't want those notes. In order to create a hybrid, we actually want to avoid those notes. Okay, so if you're doing this along with me, you should do this on a piece of paper. Write out the C scale and then cross out the root and third. Now there's an extra little bit. It says put an X through the S4 in the Ionian chord scale, and that's because S4 is a avoid note. And it would, if we included it, it would give a very non-Ionian sound. So, all right, then we go through the process and it says you try to list all possible triad and seventh chords that can function as upper structures for the hybrids. Don't use diminished chords. So if we rule out diminished chords, we see what can we build out of this C Ionian scale? What triad or seventh chords can we build? Let's see, can we build a triad based on D? No, we can't because F is not available. Can we build a triad based on G? Well, yes, we can because we have G, and then we have a third above it, B, and then we have a third above that, D. So that means we could build a G triad. And then let's see if we can build anything else. Can we build anything on A? No, because we've crossed out the doubled root, and also we've crossed out the third, so we can't get that E in there. So we can't build anything on A. And we can't build anything on B because B is a diminished triad, and also F is not available. And of course you can't build anything on C because C is the root, and we don't want to double the root. So there's literally only one hybrid we can get out of the scale, the one built on the 5th scale degree, and there it is, G. And the way this would be written, of course, is a G triad over C. Now, in the future, since we derive this from an Ionian chord scale, you can just memorize there's only one hybrid from the Ionian chord scale. There's only one, and it's this hybrid. So in order to be able to transpose it to other keys, we try to think of it in some kind of shorthand way. What's essentially happening is the major chord built on the 5th scale degree is over the chord scale root. Well, the short way of saying that is 5 major over 1. So this is a way to remember this hybrid and be able to put it in other keys. 5 major over 1 in an Ionian chord scale. So to just test your understanding of that, why don't you try to think about what would it be in the key of B flat? If it was B flat, what would 5 major over 1 be? And you can pause the video while you think about it and then restart to get the answer. Okay, we're back. So if you came up with the answer F major over B flat, you are correct. That's the 5 major triad in the B flat Ionian chord scale. And the way we would sum it up is to say 5 major over 1, and then you can just transpose it to any key. As long as you can build an Ionian chord scale and you can figure out what 5 major is, then you can build this hybrid. So that's the beginning. Now, not all chord scales only have one hybrid, but this is a good one to start with because it really only has one hybrid. It's very easy to remember. Listen to the difference in sound too. Here's a conventional voicing of C major 7. and here's the hybrid voicing. So the hybrid voicing, again, is meant to sound different. The whole point of it is that it sounds different because it doesn't have a third. It's more ambiguous sounding, it's more open sounding, it's emulating kind of a C major 7 with a 9, but of course there's no third, so it's not really a major chord. It's just, it's neat, it's not major or minor. It's just a shadow of a major sound. Okay? So, but it's a very cool sound in some situations. Okay, so that's Ionian. Now let's take another chord scale that has only one hybrid, and that is this chord scale, the altered chord scale. Please take a moment and see if you can write out a G altered chord scale and label it, and then pause the video and then start the video up and see how you did. Okay, we're back, and here's the answer. Here's the altered chord scale, G altered. Now notice it's an unusual scale, so if you are still a little fuzzy on it, you should review this. It has a root, of course. It has a third. It doesn't have a normal fifth. It has a flat fifth, and notice that there's no fourth scale degree. It has a flat fifth, and then it has a flat 7. So those are the chord tones, 1, 3, flat 5, and flat 7. Then in between the chord tones, everything is altered. So a flat 9, a sharp 9, a flat 13. Now when you start deriving hybrids, remember, I've already told you that there's only one available hybrid in this, but I'm now going to prove to you why that's true. So remember, the first thing we always do is we cross out the root, and we cross out the third. I don't have to cross out S4 in the scale because there is no S4, but even if there was, in dominant chords, you can keep the 4 as long as it's a chord tone, so then it could be sus4 in dominant chords. But anyway, there is none on this one, so it's a moot point. Okay, so now we would start trying to build, remember, upper structures and triads. So we'd start with the A flat, and we'd try to build something, but as you can see, there's no third available. There's nothing in the scale that gives us a third above the A flat, because that B is not available. So we cannot build something on top of. We cannot build that note is still available, but we can't build a chord on top of it. Let's try the A sharp, or you could also think of it as a B flat. Well, the B flat the A sharp or B flat, we could build a triad on it. If you think of that as B flat if you want, then you'd have a B flat minor triad. But the problem is then you would have a note that would end up sounding like a third against the G root. And so even though you were trying to, convey a G7 altered sound, you would actually be conveying a G minor sound if you used this note. So even though it's listed as T sharp 9, it really could sound like a minor third. Again, think of it as B flat for a minute. And the whole thing about hybrids is we don't want any sound of any kind of third in the chord. So that's why that one doesn't work. So then we try to build something on top of the D flat. Let's see if we can do that. We've got a D flat, we've got an F, that's a third, and we've got an A flat available. So that actually makes a D flat major triad right there, and that is available. That, there's nothing to prevent us from using that one. It's available because those notes are available. So there we've got one so far. We've got a hybrid upper structure built on that. Then we go to E flat. We see if we can build something, but alas, there is no third above the E flat, so we can't build anything on this. So that's that one's out of the running in terms of building a hybrid on it. And then we get to the flat 7, and that's an F. And again, we could get an A flat would give us a third above the F, but then we wouldn't have the C available. I mean, the B available or any kind of C available to create a triad. So nothing's available there either. So we've gone through all the processes, and we found that only one hybrid is available on G altered. And what is it? Well, it's D flat over G. And then using our mechanism for remembering hybrids, we can call it, what do you think? We can call it, yes, flat 5 major over 1. Okay, so again, this is not an analysis. We're not analyzing the chord as flat 5 major over 1. We're just using it as a way to remember it. It's the flat 5 triad over the 1 of the chord scale being G altered. And that way we can easily transpose it. So this is the hybrid. This right here is what we could use as a hybrid for this chord right here. And this is the hybrid substitute for this chord. We've gone through 2 chord scales. We've gone through the process and we've seen that there are a couple of chord scales where there's only one available hybrid. Now that is not the case with many other chord scales. In fact, if we go through this whole process in Lydian, if you recall, there is no avoid note in Lydian. And so for the 4 chord, we would actually end up with potentially 5 upper structure hybrids there, and 3 triads and 2 7th chords. And on this chord, a Mixolydian chord, we'd end up with 5 there as well. And on this chord, a Dorian chord, we'd end up with a number of 5 potentially there as well. And even on our sub 5, we'd end up with 5. So many of our chord scales do produce a lot of hybrids. But let's go ahead and do mixo right now. So what I'd like you to do is write out a G mixo chord scale, cross out the roots, cross out the third, and then see what you can build from there. And then pause the video and then check back to see what the answer is. Okay, we're back, and here's our G mixo scale labeled out. And now we will start our process of deriving. So first of all, we have to cross out our roots. We have to cross out our third. And then we start building, see what we can build. Can we build anything on the A? Well, we've got an A, C, and an E, so potentially we could use that. 2 minor. So that's, with all these mixo hybrids, you're going to discover that there's never going to be a B, so it's never going to be a major sound, but it's quite often going to have a C in it, which will give a sus sound, have a third in the chord. Okay, let's see about the next one. Can we build something on the C? Well, we can have a C, an E, but then there's no G available, so we can't build anything on that scale degree. So then we go to the 5th scale degree. Let's see if we can build something there. D, F, and A. Yes, we can. D minor over G. So there it is. That's our upper structure of D minor over G, and that gives us also, actually there's no C in that chord, so actually it's not really a sus sound. It's just sort of an ambiguous sound that potentially we could use. Now we could also add, there's also a C available, so we could do a 7th chord version of that one. See, we have the D minor over G, which is kind of a very ambiguous sound, and then we have a D minor 7 over G, which is also available because we have the C available, and that's more of a sus sound. It's a very common hybrid. Okay, now we move on. We built 2 hybrids off of the D. Now we try to build something off of E, and we can't because we don't have a way to get a third above the E, because we go to the F. We've got an F, we've got an A, we've got a C, so that's an F triad. Okay, and this is probably the most common Mixolydian hybrid. It creates a nice sus sound. I mean F major over G rather. Okay, and then we can see if we can get more out of it by adding a 7th, and which it turns out we can, F, A, C, E, so that would give us F major 7 over G as well. G analysis, of course, what this gives us is a flat 7, a 9, and a sus 4. And this gives us the flat 7, the 9, the sus 4, and a 13 above the chord. So, okay, very sus-like sounds. This is also a very common one. These 2 are not so common because they're just a little too ambiguous. They don't give us a very satisfying sound. They can be used, but they're just not as popular. So these are the more popular ones, and of these 3, this one or this one is the most popular, probably this one. So that would be a good one to memorize as you're thinking about memorizing. And how would you sum up this chord? Well, you think, what is F in my G Mixolydian scale? Well, the F triad is a flat 7 major, so the summation would be flat 7 major over 1. And sum them up. So these are all very useful mixo hybrids, all right? And you gradually start building up this repertoire of hybrids that you can just quickly write out instead of having to figure them out one by one. And that's what this chart is all about. This is not all the possible hybrids, but it's by far the most common and utilitarian ones. And so you should continue writing out and deriving the hybrids just so that you can get, familiar with how to do that and convince yourself that they really are coming from the chord scale. But sooner or later, you should just start memorizing some of them. And these are the ones that I would recommend you memorize first.